From NAFSA 2016, we're talking with Gayle Tzemach Lemmon, an author and journalist and a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. She writes most frequently about women being empowered in their countries, and that includes 2 books, The Dressmaker of Karkhana. Do I have that right? Very good. And also Ashley's War, about First Lieutenant Ashley White Stump, who was among the first people in the cultural support teams that the U.S. Army used in Afghanistan. Gayle, it's such a pleasure to be able to talk to you.
Great to join you.
And I'm wondering what gave you the bug to go the direction you did. You graduated with a journalism degree, but then went on to get more of an education in foreign relations.
I did. I had always been curious about the world, but I think I come at it a little bit differently. I mean, I grew up, my mom was a single mom who worked 2 jobs. So my mom worked at the phone company during the day and sold Tupperware at night. And I would sometimes go with her to Tupperware parties, and I would go with her often in the evenings. She was trying to finish her college degree because none of my parents or grandparents had ever graduated from college.
So 3 jobs, really, then?
Yes, and a parent is 7 jobs. So, yeah. And, you know, it really taught me to see her work that hard and to sacrifice and to make sure that I had all these opportunities that she hadn't. Really instilled in me the power of education. And she was a news hound, you know, would watch Linda Ellerby at that time, right?
Yes.
And when we would sit at night and watch the news, and we always had the Washington Post because we grew up sort of on the, you know, less affluent side of the Washington divide. And so we always read papers and watched news, and it was part of, you know, of growing up was understanding America in the world and why what was happening in the world mattered. But we never really traveled. I mean, we didn't have the funds for that. I had gone abroad once as a 10-year-old. My grandmother took me to London, and I remember just my eyes popping out of my head and thinking, wow, there's this whole big world out here. And my mother had done study abroad. So I'd always known about the, you know, sort of this allure, but really the first time I went overseas backpacking after college, I thought, you know, there is so much to see. The world is so big, and really the only way I'm going to be able to do this is through fellowships and scholarships. And I really have to say it is an incredible opportunity to be an American who's had the chance to go overseas on different exchange programs, because there's no substitute for firsthand, front row, seeing how the world works than going abroad and really being in every uncomfortable situation imaginable, from trying to figure out how to say button at the dry cleaner, right, to, you know, figuring out how to get on a bus in Spain. And, you know, all of these things are life experiences that make you smarter and sharper and more able to contribute when you come back. It really does matter.
I think you were anticipating my next question, because it obviously sounds like you would recommend that for any young person who's, or any person at all who's an American and who could probably even get a better view of our own country from a distant place.
I don't think you understand fully the responsibility and power of being an American from my personal standpoint until you are overseas, until you see how other people see America and are really defending your country in all kinds of circumstances that you have never been put in, right? And really understand, to me, I came back so deeply patriotic about America. Not that I hadn't been before, but I never really thought about it. You know, I was always surrounded by Americans, so you didn't really understand what makes it special. But to see the power of the soil, right, that anybody can be an American because it is an ideal, and that makes us special, it makes us different, and that is part of why we have to take our principles so very seriously. I think it came to me from spending so much time abroad.
You also advocate that people spend some time in countries that are quite unlike America, being third world, or...
Well, I don't advocate for that, but I have been...
But it's certainly a certain kind of understanding.
Huge privilege.
Yes.
It's been a huge privilege for me to be embraced, to be able to spend time with in communities that, you know, don't usually see Americans, and in places which are known for how tough they are, but when you see them firsthand, you really do see a grace that you don't see very often in many other places. And also, really, it is the intersection of the best and worst of humanity, especially in places that are trying to recover from war.
And that sounds so daunting to Americans who've never been anywhere near it.
Yeah,
What
and I didn't know
qualities-
anything about it when I went in. I have to tell you, I went to Afghanistan the first time. First, I went to Rwanda in the summer of 2005, and I had spent the summer at BP in London between the first and second year of business school, and I just decided I wanted to go write about entrepreneurship and people in tough parts of the world rebuilding their countries. And I'd come out at that topic because I had seen my father go under financially. I understood the power of a job to make a difference and really add dignity to people's lives. And in the toughest moments, in the toughest parts of the world, it is a job that offers a way out and dignity and a chance for the next generation. And that was really why I went to Rwanda, but I didn't know anything about going to tough parts of the world or what shots you might need or, what visas you might need, and so I always love readers so much because they're going through it with you, right? It's not like I have 40 years of experience on them. It's like, let's go on this journey together.
What are the qualities besides grace that you mentioned in situations like that where people are persevering and even managing to make progress in some way? How are they doing that against such tough odds?
Well, and it's funny because I never see myself as writing about women, although obviously there are lots of women in these stories. I feel really fascinated by a couple of themes: resilience, grit, courage, community, and the power of one individual to both make a difference and to be inspired by serving something greater than themselves. And I think both books are really about those themes.
Let's talk about Ashley's War, because this was a very interesting time where you were able to follow this cultural team. I'm interested to know if you know how the Army came to this, that they should be trying to make inroads with women.
Yeah, and in fact, I actually made, and we still, every author, you always think about how to put your book together. And we really wrestled with this, and I think we came out in the right place because it was a new history, which is the first chapter of Ashley's War is a really how did we get here. The opening of Ashley's War is a battlefield scene. And then it pulls back to how in creation was it that this team of women was recruited for Army Ranger, Navy SEAL, other special operations teams missions back in 2011, all at a time while women officially were banned from ground combat. The first time I heard about this story was 2012. And I immediately had three questions. Who were these people? What were they doing there? And how in the world as a country did we not know them? And it's really those three questions that I set out to take the reader on the journey with me of, let's go figure this out.
What Lieutenant Ashley White Stumpf and her team do? What was it they were able to gain from the women that helped with the rest of the operation?
I mean, look, whether you are in southern Nevada or southern Colorado or southern Afghanistan, if you want to know what's happening in the community, where do you usually start? Right? Women, right? I mean, you want to say who's been in the neighborhood, who's been in your house, what's happening with your kids, right? I mean, and Ashley's War is really at the beginning a recognition by some of the most tested leaders in the United States military that we don't have any access to half the population because of the conservative nature of the society. Mm-hmm. Male soldiers could not talk to Afghan women without causing offense. And we need that information. This is a battlefield where information is life and death for everybody involved. And if we don't have access to half the population, we're going half blind. And so this was an effort to recruit the soldiers who would be fit enough, fierce enough, and also feminine, and I don't mean in any frilly way, but also just themselves, right? There would be women who were comfortable in their own skin, who could, in the midst of battle, in some of the most dangerous and at that point most important missions in the Afghanistan war, could be out there keeping up with men who train and test 365 days a year as a team, and be out there and in the split-second moment of battle be able to find information and keep women and children away from what was happening and search quarters where people might have hidden things that would have made a difference in that mission, and to be able to do that quickly and quietly, and to be able to help everybody get home safely that night.
It's a remarkable story. And obviously these women had resilience and grit
Absolutely.
going in, right?
Absolutely. And I think, they had a grit that we have probably rarely seen on our pages or on our screens. I think we've all seen it in our own lives. But I think oftentimes there is a gap between what we see on the page or our screens and the multidimensional lives that many women lead, right? And so I wanted to show just how funny and warm and kind and fit and intense and, driven these young women were, not to go to war, but to make a difference for their country.
They certainly did, and it's so sad that the first lieutenant died in 2011 in one of these battles, right?
That's right. And these teams were recruited in the start of 2011, and they were recruited. They were going through a selection process that was called 100 Hours of Hell, which was a 5-day process to pick, people who were the most fit and the most physically and mentally agile, people who could keep up on these kinds of combat operations. And they were selected in either March or May, trained in June and July, and by August we're seeing the kind of combat experienced by less than 5% of the entire United States military. Wow. And on October 22nd, 2011, First Lieutenant Ashley White was on a mission like any other night. And she and 2 Rangers, Sergeant First Class Christopher DeMay and Private First Class Christopher Horns, were killed in action when the compound that they were going to seek for weapons and for a weapons dealer turned out to be booby-trapped.
It's a remarkable story. In your other book, you get to the entrepreneurship, and as you say, having a job being so important to someone in a country that is so shaky. What is it about women entrepreneurs, do you think, that is especially good?
I think it's about, particularly in post-conflict, after war, right? First of all, women are the population you have left, right? Rwanda, in the immediate aftermath of the genocide, was 77% women.
Is that right?
Second of all, they tend to be more trusted because most of the time they are not combatants. And third of all, they're often left as heads of household for the first time, especially in very traditional places where perhaps they haven't had that role before. But they have to figure out how to feed their children. And that is why women entrepreneurs can actually make a huge difference in keeping families out of poverty and in raising communities' living standards when they have the resources to actually start businesses, even if they're micro.
When Americans go abroad and learn some of these things firsthand, get to know some people, as you say, how can they bring that home and have it make a difference in a place that is so different?
It is such a personal question, right? I mean, I think you could do it any number of ways. You can share the stories. So that, I think one of the biggest issues I see right now in this country is this otherization we have of people who are different from us.
Even if they really aren't.
Absolutely. And even when they're Americans.
Yes.
And I think why I love stories is because they take people who look other and they make them us. And that is why stories matter. So you can come home and share your story. You can come home and volunteer. You can come home and go try to volunteer to help refugees. You can come home and volunteer to help exchange students or to host exchange students. You can go help somebody who's struggling to learn English, at English as a second language class. So I think there's so many ways, and it's so deeply personal. But there's always the power that each one of us has to make a difference.
Do you think more Americans need to be doing things like that?
I wouldn't, I'm not in the mandatory business of anything business, but I think that as a country, the more, and I don't think it has to be abroad, but I think as a country, the more generous we are of spirit and of sightline, the better off we are, because America's role in the world matters. And that's why knowing the world matters. It doesn't mean you have to leave your borders, but of course, if you can, it's always helpful to see firsthand.
We frequently hear about how people in other countries know more about us than we know about them. Is that because they aspire to what we have in the United States?
I think it's for a couple of reasons. First, we have very unique geography. I mean, this country was founded by people who wanted nothing to do with the rest of the world, right? I mean, I think that's very important to remember. But I also think that we, as a rich nation that has had a great deal of influence in shaping the post-World War II order, have had an inordinate role in shaping the global institutions that govern so many aspects of our lives, whether we know it or not. From the internet to, how cell phones work, all kinds of things, to Google, and lots of other things. So I think that being an American does give you both the luxury of not paying attention to the rest of the world and also the urgency of paying your attention to the rest of the world, because geography, security, and prosperity have all meant that a lot of other people pay a whole great deal of attention to us.
There is a little bit of a complaining element in the country that feels as though America has somehow lost its place in the world. What do you say to those people?
I think we have to look at the two different pieces of that. I think the domestic piece of people's frustrations with globalization are urgent. I think they really do matter. My mother was a union worker. I could get braces, I could go to the eye doctor, I could get all of these things, and she never worried because they were all covered by her health insurance. You find me those jobs today.
That's right.
Right, where 100% is covered. And I do think that elites in this country, and I say this as somebody who really has lived in both worlds and had the privilege of people sacrificing for me in one so that I could live in another, is that elites in this country have not taken full responsibility for what it means to be left out of the global economy, because that is a terrible place to be. When your job goes away, when your way of life goes away, and everybody tells you, well, that's part of the benefits and costs of globalization. Well, that doesn't put food on your table. That doesn't pay for your kid to go to school. So I do think that we have to understand why people feel this way. That said, I think it's up to leaders in this country to really be honest about what American leadership has produced for America and for the rest of the world. And when I don't mean American leadership at large, I mean American leadership at its best when we live up to the principles upon which we were founded.
And believe in them and
absolutely, and
them.
take them seriously. And that the right of the soil means something, and that we are a welcoming people, right? And that America is an ideal that we all strive for. And that it matters that, and I think it goes back to part of the theme of Ashley's war, which is less than 1% of this country has fought 100% of its wars for 14 years, with huge chunks of this nation having the luxury of not paying attention at all. And that is a problem for our country. It's a devastating problem.
If you have no investment in what you're sending these people to do.
No understanding about what the costs are for deploying and deploying and deploying. And what we are asking of people who've become part of this warrior caste that touches almost nobody else. I mean, I know people who are deployed right now, and I probably wouldn't have said that, before, 10 years ago, before I started working on all this, although my husband is former Navy, so, we would know some. But this divide that we have within American society, I think, is a huge issue. And if you want to look at who some of the people who are most worried about America's role in the world are, it's people who've served America in uniform.
And the people who can get a perspective, say you go abroad and you get to know some people and you have a certain amount of education that way. Higher education is also pretty important in understanding America's place in the world and how we got where we are.
Absolutely. I mean, I think education is not just one of the best poverty fighters in the world, but it's one of the most potent door openers, world enlargers, right? It is the way we get to be our best selves, right? It doesn't have to be formal education, but if you have the luxury and the privilege of formal secondary education, how fortunate are you, right? I mean, I never thought I would go to business school, and to have the opportunity to go to business school and to be with people who I think were just incredibly bright. People, what a luxury to sit in a classroom for 2 years and just think about, the way the world works, how it might be different, what ways can you make a difference and make a contribution. I think, education is a leveler that is, at its best, one of the really foundations of preserving American way of life. It's education as a leveler.
You said earlier that you, in your own experience, it being in other countries, you spent a lot of time defending this country.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
It's fascinating, actually. I was in Germany in 9/11, and I was there on a Robert Bosch Fellowship, which is an international exchange program. And they put us together with the German students who were going to go to the United States days after September 11th. And it was a shock, because the first question was from a German young woman who also had American citizenship, because her father was a diplomat. So they'd been in New York at the time. So she spoke English with this flawless American accent. And she said, "Will the United States now do something about its foreign policy?" And every American in the room jumped. I mean, look, it was 3 days after September 11th. We all jumped out of our seats. There were a bunch of New Yorkers.
Yes.
There, my grandmother, my mother, are both from New York. It was, you want to talk about build bridge buster. I mean, we were really having a moment, but it was actually a really powerful moment. I fundamentally disagreed with the premise of the question, and still do, but it was fascinating looking back to see immediately where so much of the conversation went, and to understand how other people saw it, whether we agreed, which we did not, or not. And I'll never forget being there in an international exchange program at that moment.
Did you feel you were in any way able to influence her, change her mind?
I think we certainly shared with them. Well, first of all, I think they probably had to break us up after a few minutes.
I wish I could have been there.
Oh, yeah, but no, I think, honestly, it ended up being a very productive conversation that continued for a year, because we would see each other at different events, and we would, I think we never saw it the way they did, but we understood how they saw the world, which was powerful. And I think we did show people why it was so personal and painful. This was not a policy question for us. This was a personal devastation.
One last question. The theme of the NAFSA annual conference is building capacity. And what does that mean to you from where you sit?
I mean, it means helping local leaders become leaders who can make a difference. Building capacity. Capacity building is this phrase that can mean nothing or it can mean everything. And it depends on how you use it and what you actually do to back it up. But for me, education is the ultimate capacity builder, right? It's about giving you the tools to go out there and do what you're going to do in the world that makes a difference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It has been great to visit with you. From NAFSA 2016, Gayle Tzemach Lemmon.